as I'm doing that, I'm picking up speed, I think. At least I'm taking bigger bites. Many times it's just been a few verses. We're going to do a whole chapter today. But there is, I believe it needs to be looked at as a unit. And it's the story of Paul's trial before Felix. Page 791 in those pew Bibles, if you want to grab a brown Bible and follow with us. If you brought your own, good for you. Follow in that. Acts chapter 24, 1 to 27, and page 791 there. 5 days later, now that's 5 days later after Paul had been escorted at night with 470 soldiers from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Now Caesarea is on the coast of Israel, and that's where the headquarters was for the Roman government, hence the name Caesarea. So the Romans built the town. There wasn't much water there, so if you go to Israel, you'll see this phenomenal aqueduct that ran for miles and miles getting water to Caesarea. And so that's where this is taking place. And so he's been there, they hauled him in at night. 5 days later is where we pick up. 5 days later, the high priest Ananias went down to Caesarea with some of the elders and a lawyer named Tertullus, and they brought their charges against Paul before the governor. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. "We have enjoyed a long period of peace under you, and your foresight has brought about reforms in this nation. Everywhere and in every way, most excellent Felix, we acknowledge this with profound gratitude. But in order not to weary you further, I would request that you be kind enough to hear us briefly. We have found this man to be a troublemaker, stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. He's a ringleader of the Nazarene sect, and even tried to desecrate the temple, so we seized him. But the commander Lysias came and took him away from us with much violence, ordering his accusers to come before you. By examining him yourself, you will be able to learn the truth about all these charges we are bringing against him." The other Jews joined in the accusation, asserting that these things were true. When the governor motioned for him to speak, Paul replied, "I know that for a number of years you've been a judge over this nation, so I gladly make my defense. You can easily verify that no more than 12 days ago I went up to Jerusalem to worship. My accusers did not find me arguing with anyone at the temple or stirring up a crowd in the synagogues or anywhere else in the city. And they cannot prove to you the charges they are now making against me. However, I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the Way, which they call sect. I believe everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets. And I have the same hope in God as these men themselves have, that there will be a resurrection both of the righteous and the wicked. So I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and men. After an absence of several years, I came to Jerusalem to bring my people gifts for the poor and to present offerings. I was ceremonially clean when they found me in the temple courts doing this. There was no crowd with me, nor was I involved in any disturbance. But there are some Jews from the province of Asia who ought to be here before you and bring charges if they have anything against me. Or those who are here should state what crime they found in me when I stood before the Sanhedrin, unless it was this thing I shouted as I stood in their presence. It is concerning the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you today." Then Felix, who was well acquainted with the Way, adjourned the proceedings. "When Lysias the commander comes," he said, "I will decide your case." He ordered the centurion to keep Paul under guard, but to give him some freedom and permit his friends to take care of his needs. Several days later, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. He sent for Paul and listened to him as he spoke about faith in Christ Jesus. As Paul talked about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, "That's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you." At the same time, he was hoping that Paul would offer him a bribe, so he sent for him frequently and talked with him. When 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, but because Felix wanted to grant a favor to the Jews, he left Paul in prison. So, those of you that are complaining that government and court systems still move slowly, 2 years on this one. But what kind of things can we dig out of this portion of Scripture? I found this picture. I thought it would be very politically provoking in this neighborhood. What's the difference in those two animals? One is a wolf and one is a dog. And flattery looks like friendship, just like a wolf looks like a dog. Did you notice how that lawyer for the high priest buttered up the governor? Flattery, everything's one. Anyway, so be careful when people flatter you. There's this much difference between a wolf and a dog. I've heard also that flattery can be chewed on, just don't swallow it. But anyway, flattery is a big part of what goes on in this portion of Scripture. The other thing that I really want to talk to you about today is procrastination. It is a killer. It is tough. How many times have we procrastinated? Do you have any idea how much trouble I am having right now, standing in front of you, talking about procrastination? If you had any idea how many unfinished projects I have at my house, I don't have any right to stand here. But the truth is, if we procrastinate and keep putting things off, things get ugly. And that's kind of where I'm going to be headed today, as we do this. But we'll begin with the case that was presented by the high priest, by the religious leaders, to the governor Felix. And it was nothing besides flattery and lies. They start out, first of all, the high priest didn't even do it himself. He hired a lawyer. Now, I don't know, and we don't know where this Tertullus came from, but the name is a Roman name. So the chance of him being a Jew is slim to none. But he was probably the best trial lawyer that they could afford, and so they brought him down. And so this high priest brings his lawyer with him, and they march into the governor. And this is his opening comments. Doesn't say anything about the case. He just looks right at the governor and just flatters him and just covers him with all kinds of fake, compliments anyway. Everything about you is wonderful. The peace we've been experiencing, the reforms that you've brought, and you can just see him beginning to get more and more eloquent, and then he very humbly says, "But for your sake, I'll keep it brief." And this is our issue. And this guy, Paul, this is why we're here. And Paul is, first of all, a troublemaker. Oh man, if every troublemaker in the world was hauled into courts, there would not be enough courts or courtrooms or judges in the world. But this man is a troublemaker. Ooh, that's kind of pretty scary. But he's a troublemaker. He starts riots all over the world. Now, number one, Paul didn't start the riot. He would go and he would proclaim Jesus Christ. And over these first 23 chapters of Acts, from about 10 on, every time Paul would say anything and begin to preach about Jesus Christ, the other Jews would get all up in arms, and they were the ones that were rioting. They started the riots. Paul never did. But he is accused of, he starts the riots, and all over the world. Now that is a little bit of a stretch. A lot of riots happened where he went, but he had not gone all over the world. So those first two things are certainly lies. He's the ringleader of the Nazarene sect. And The Nazarenes today is a denomination, and we don't call the Nazarenes a sect anymore. But back then they did, because Jesus was from the town of Nazareth, hence he was a Nazarene. And so the people that follow this Jesus guy were part of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he's a ringleader of that group. Not really. He tried to desecrate our temple. He tried to. It doesn't say that he did or that he succeeded, but he tried to desecrate our temple, and then Lysias took him from us with great violence. Now Lysias was the military guy that was in charge in Jerusalem. And the only reason he took Paul out of there, if you look back to the last chapter, is that he was afraid they were going to tear him to bits. So the violence was not from Lysias and his guys. They were trying to prevent any further violence, and that there wouldn't be a death and a mugging of Paul that was there. So the whole system that they're setting up is a bunch of lies, from the top all the way to the bottom. But isn't it interesting how you can take the truth and what you claim to be the truth and you start examining it? The heart of it is really lies. That's exactly, because if you read, and if I just went through those things, he's a troublemaker, there's been riots all around the world, he tried to desecrate our temple, he's a leader of this sect, all these things, oh yeah. And then it says all the other Jews that were there said, yep, that's the truth. And if they'd have looked and looked deeper, they would have seen that it was built on lies. And that was what Paul's accusation was set on. Now, can you get truth from lies? I don't think you can. Then the lawyer says this, you will find the truth about these charges. And I have a hunch that when the judge holds up his magnifying glass, he's going to see truth. I think that looks more like a lie. And the other Jews said that, yeah, it was true. Just because you have a lot of people that agree with it does not make it true. And we as Christians today are becoming more and more a minority. And we need to realize that just because the majority says one thing, that does not make it true. Now, Paul comes up and he gives his defense. It's interesting that he doesn't have a lawyer. He stands up and gives his own witness. He is his own defense. He is his own testimony. He says, let me give you a timeline, Judge. 12 days ago, this is when all this started. This isn't a long, drawn-out thing. This is less than 2 weeks ago. I came up to Jerusalem, and my purpose for coming was to worship. And then a little later, he says, I've been gone for several years, but 10 days or 14 days ago, 12 days ago, I came up. And so I went there to worship. And I do worship God in this way, the way, which is what they called the Christian way back then. They weren't called, the church wasn't called Christian yet at that point, but the part of the church that followed the teachings of Jesus Christ and his claims and said, yes, he is the Son of God. Yes, he died for my sins. Yes, he rose from the dead. Yes, he's coming back again. That was called the way. And I think it may have come from that little, remember Jesus talking in the Gospel of John, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. The way wouldn't be a bad thing to call the church anymore. In fact, all the bad press we're getting, it might not be a bad idea. Let's change our name. But I'm part of the way. I still believe in the law and the prophets. So boy, he's just throwing this. That's a pretty clever deal. Because these people that came and accused him are the ones that are the leaders and believers of God, the law, and the prophets. And Paul says, I believe in God. I believe the law. I believe the prophets. I believe the same thing they do, that there's going to be a resurrection, both of the good and the bad, and they'll be rewarded or punished. And I brought gifts to my people. And then, to me, that was so cool, the way Paul did that. What a magnificent maneuver. I brought gifts to the poor, my people, who were poor and needy. My people were the Jews, this very group that was attacking him. I came with gifts for the hurting people that were there. And I was ceremonially clean. If you want to go back and check, I took a vow, I had my head shaved, I went through all of the proper rituals, I went through the right waiting period, I did everything that I was supposed to do that according to their law made me ceremonially clean, and I was ceremonially clean, so I couldn't have tried to defile their temple, and there was no crowd with me. If there was no crowd with me, how could I have started a riot? How could I have been a troublemaker? I was there worshiping God, ceremonially clean, bringing gifts to people that needed it, and no crowd was with me, and they have nothing against me. I'm innocent. And Paul just said, I didn't do anything. What I did was right. I have not done anything of crime nature. I haven't done anything wrong. Now Felix the governor, quite the guy. He knew about the way. So he was a ruler that was aware of some religious and cultural things that were going on in the area where he was governor, which any governor should do. But he was familiar with the way. He heard about this Jesus guy, and he knew that there was a group of people that were following that. In fact, he was married to a Jew, to a Jewess. And makes me wonder, was she part of the way? I don't know. But guys, you know, my grandmother collected salt and pepper shakers. And in their little house in Big Timber, when Grandpa built it, he had a thing that he put in the wall where all these hundreds of salt and pepper shakers were in there. And there was one set of salt and pepper shakers where there was a rooster and there was a hen. And the rooster, if you held it up, it says, I rule the roost. Pick the next one up, it says, I rule the rooster. I have a hunch that she had some influence in his life. I don't know that. But he was married to a Jewess, and he said, after Paul said his thing and the accusations and the opening arguments, he says, okay, time out, we're adjourning. He just said, I'm not going to make a judgment here. He says, I'm going to wait until Lysias gets up here. Which would have been interesting because when Lysias, the military guy, shows up, is he going to say, oh yeah, I roughed him up? No, he didn't. I got him out of there so they didn't kill him. So the more of the truth would have come out. But Felix adjourns the trial. And then he does this little move. Already, Paul was staying in Herod's palace. He wasn't staying in the Roman jail. He was under guard, but he was in he was in Herod's palace. Pretty nice accommodations. And then Felix said, let his friends come and help him out. Let him take care of him. And so he has open visiting hours. They can bring food in. They can do whatever else they want to. Things that he needed. Perhaps came in and he dictated letters to them. We don't know. But he says, let's give Paul some more freedom. And then it says he listened to Paul share about Jesus. And so I want to talk to him again. Bring him back in here. So the accusers were not there, but the accused, Paul, was there. What do you think Paul's going to talk about? You give him a chance, he's going to talk about Jesus. And so he starts talking about Jesus, and he talks, if you're going to tell the story of Jesus, not just that he's wonderful and loving and kind and he died for us, but he's going to come back again, and unless we make that decision to accept him, we're going to spend eternity separated from God. And so he talks about judgment, and when Felix began to hear that, he became afraid. And I would think, that to me that's pretty obvious that his thinking was that I'm not ready. I'm not fit. I would be on the judged side. I'd be guilty. And so he became afraid. And so the next thing that happened is perhaps the most frightening, terrible thing that I can think of, and it goes way back. He says this in Acts 24:24. I will wait for a more convenient time, and then you come back. I'll hear you then. How many times is our relationship with God based on our convenience? It's not a convenient time right now. It's not a good time. I need to get some other things sorted out. I need to clean myself up enough that God would accept me. No, you don't. God's grace is bigger than the worst thing that any of us, all of us corporately, have done together. His grace is bigger than that. And the story, my mind goes back to a story of my father, who was also a pastor, in the little town of Rappahannock. And I remember my dad preaching a sermon on this text. Is that frightening or what? Because we left Rappahannock when I was in the 5th grade. So I can remember, as a snot-nosed kid, a sermon that my dad preached, and it was about this. And it was a confession on his part. Because there was a friend that he had that he just felt God pushing him. You need to go talk to him about the Lord. You need to go share with him and find out, what's going on. And Dad said he had other things, and he just, man, it's just not a good time. I can't do that. And he went to bed, gets a phone call the next morning, and he answers the phone, and the guy that he was going to go visit had been killed in a car wreck. I don't think he ever came to grips with that the rest of his life. Because wait to a more convenient time. And that convenient time can be both as Felix, I'll listen to Jesus more at a more convenient time, or I will share Jesus at a more convenient time. But boy, there is, if anything, a huge tragedy of procrastination. If we put it off, it could be irreparable what happens. If we have a feeling, a hunch, a nudge from God, from the Holy Spirit, we better move. We need to do it. Well, what if they think I'm stupid? Well, they already do, so it doesn't really matter. But, we get so worried about what other people will say and think and do, and it's all a matter of pride. It's all a matter of trying to maintain this facade of I'm a Christian and in charge of all things and everything's great with me, but they procrastinate. And so, what's the solution? I believe that this is it. When is the best time to accept Jesus? Look at that clock. It's in your bulletin. Now. There is no better time than right now to say, God, I have really messed up my life bad. The church likes to use that term, sin. But I don't want it to sound too churchy. How many of us have done everything we should have done? How many of us have not done the things that thou shalt not? Those lying, cheating, stealing. We always pick out one or two big sins and say, well, I'm not one of them. I didn't do that. But folks, every one of us are sinners. And I am, as Paul said, my name is Paul as well. I'm the chief. I always had a Navajo friend that said that Jesus Christ was a Native American. His name was Chief Cornerstone. But we need to realize that my sin needs to be dealt with right now. There is no guarantee that any of us are going to go to bed tonight. There's no guarantee that any of us are going to get up in the morning. Every breath is a gift. Every heartbeat is a gift. Life is fragile. We heard that this morning. This pilot who was killed, nobody had an idea of that. We need to realize the importance of making decisions for Christ now and the danger and tragedy of procrastination. If you think about that, and I have no idea where your heart is, but there's a line at the bottom of your bulletin. And if you want to make that decision today, you don't need a magic formula. You don't need a bunch of perfect words. You don't need to go through the hoops that many times we as Christians and pastors put out there. Talk to God in your way. God, if you exist, would you forgive me for what I've done? I can't do this by myself. Give me the strength and the ability to do that. Come and live in me, and He will. That part of God is called the Holy Spirit. And it needs to be done now. I would challenge anyone who here today, I would beg you, if you haven't made that decision, make it today. Fill that out. and share it with somebody. Come and talk to me, talk to somebody else. We'll work with you. It isn't, okay, now I'm a Christian, I'm going to go on. It's a process, and it's not an easy one. It's one where we're going to walk together through life, holding each other up and having each other's back. Would you stand with me as I pray? Our Heavenly Father, as I come to you right now, I just say thank you for being the God